And welcome back to my channel, where I'm going to cover the additional customization options for the Rogue class that were introduced in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. As stated before, D&D is a role-playing game, and the overall idea is that while you are playing your character, you're taking on their persona and acting as they otherwise would. And the customizations we will be covering in this video will allow you to enhance your playing experience for the Rogue class by giving you additional avenues to customize your character and provide more detail about them. And the good news is, D&D does this in a very prompt-friendly way by providing you some examples that you can make use of directly or use them to creatively come up with your own ideas. The Rogue's customizations include things like guilty pleasures, adversaries, and benefactors. And with the introduction of Xanathar's Guide to Everything, there are some new tables that provide these examples and potential points of inspiration that you can use to add these details to your character. And the easiest way to gain access to these tables is to simply click on the Classes button here, scroll down until you get to the Rogue group in this case, select on the one for Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and it will pop this class sheet open. Partway down the sheet, you will see Guilty Pleasure, Adversary, and Benefactor. The first customization that you can add to your character fills in details about their guilty pleasures, which could potentially be used as leverage by a crafty DM to sway perceptions for your character and yourself, so you'll want to be a little bit careful here. By defining this for your character, you'll be able to provide ample excuse as to why your character might have stolen a gem from a shop, house, or other location, simply because it was one of the ones that fell in line with the overall concept of your character's guilty pleasure. Maybe your character likes a specific kind of gem, for example. But there are literally thousands and thousands of ideas and concepts that you can come up with around this particular kind of avenue of thought and definition for your character. So it's not just one single limitation that you need to deal with here. You could have a couple of guilty pleasures, but be careful. If you have too many, that's going to add a whole level of complexity to your character you might not be able to deal with. But what it is going to do is define how you're going to play your character when they're confronted with those kinds of situations. I.e., you're in a shop, your character sees a gem that they themselves covet because it's part of their guilty pleasure component that you've defined for your character. Do they steal it? Do they purchase it? Do they wait till the shop is closed later on in the day and come back later to steal it? Things like that. Those are all things that add an avenue of role-playing for your character simply because you've defined what they might covet in life. Now, the best location to store this kind of information is most likely either going to be in the flaws field or in the notes field of the notes tab that's on your character sheet. And I argue it fits more in the flaws because it really is something that your character's not going to be able to resist. It's their guilty pleasure. They're going to do everything that they can to acquire, if it's an item, or to experience, if it's some sort of event that's going on, elements around that guilty pleasure. So you're going to want to ensure that it is defined in an area you know you're going to remember where you put it. So flaws, it makes sense because it is a kind of a character flaw, but notes will also make sense because it could also just simply be a base generic description that you give it. The next customization is around your character's adversary, and it might be a way to provide an interesting backstory for your character in addition to providing a possible side campaign for the Dungeon Master. And once again, there are many concepts that you can make use of when it comes to being able to choose an adversary. It could be an old mentor that then turned on you at some point in the past and now you're more or less frenemies or enemies. It could be other things such as someone that your character crossed in their past, let's say, life before they became a rogue, that is now going to return at some point later on because the Dungeon Master has taken that concept and crafted a whole minor campaign around that particular aspect of your character's background. It's also possible to use the adversary to flesh out the history of your own character, especially if there's a direct interaction between your character and this adversary at one point in the past, prior to the relationship becoming so combative, for example. However, whatever form you have chosen for this particular adversary, the best location to store it is going to be in your notes section because it's not necessarily going to be tied to a flaw or an ideal of any kind. I suppose it could be part of a personality trait, but that would be very loosely coupled to it. It doesn't make any sense to put it in any of the other fields. Now, the final customization around your character is related to their benefactor, which is someone your character might owe favors to, or for some reason they rescued you and you feel that you owe them in some way, shape, or form. And that might come into play later on in the campaign, because if it's some character that your own character has a debt to, they might come to collect later on based on a little mini campaign that the Dungeon Master has intertwined into their existing overall campaign. And this could be something that is even linked directly to the adversary, in that maybe your benefactor and adversary are known to each other, and it's only your benefactor's protection that is keeping that adversary away. And maybe at some point later on, somehow that benefactor is taken out of the picture, clearing the way for that adversary to sort of come after your character at that point. This is the kind of cross-story link that can really flesh out your character's backstory and add more information about them, so that you have plenty of material you can use during various adventures that your character may go on. And when you consider that a lot of players will create a single character and then define everything about that character and then carry that character through multiple DMs' campaigns, not even the same DM, but it could be many different DMs, defining this will give you a lot of material that you can provide to the Dungeon Master for their own campaign if they happen to get stuck in some way, shape, or form. But at the same time, the more fleshed out that concept is, the more you're going to relate with your own character. Therefore, you may actually enjoy whoever's campaign you're going through a lot more because of it. And at the same time, the amount of effort you put into this, and any of the customizations for that matter, will pay off over time if the DM feels they can use some of that material to reward you by creating a mini customized adventure that is around your character at some point, or even use it as a starting point in some cases. In this case, because there are so many avenues to consider, this is best kept in the notes field, specifically on your notes tab. And that is because this could really intertwine into a whole slew of concepts that link your adversary to your benefactor, to something else that has happened in the world, or whatever backstory you want to come up with your character. You can even go so far as to actually create a note entry, if you will. And you can get to that by going to the setup box here, go to your sidebar, and then enable the notes button. And then simply pop this open and create a new note. And you can store that all in that particular note field, or note sheet, if you will, so that the Dungeon Master themselves can reference it and maybe even use it further on in the campaign. And you know, I've said that a lot, and I'm going to continue to do that, because in a lot of ways, Dungeon Masters like their players to be somewhat involved in the definition of the campaign, because it allows them to bring those players closer to the campaign and therefore hopefully enjoying it. In relation to all of the tables, the examples that are presented within those tables can be used directly, rolled for, or simply used as inspiration for your own guilty pleasure, adversary, or benefactor that you want to come up with and craft on your own. For example, if I were to go through and actually make a roll on this benefactors table, I could simply take this and drag this directly into the notes field, or I could actually just directly drag and drop. It doesn't really much matter which way you go with this, and obviously you can type it in if you want to craft your own. It's not an overly complicated process. The hardest part is going to be able to take this base idea and expand on it to be able to create it and make it your own. And the more details you provide for these customizations, the more connected you're going to become to your character. And as a side effect, the DM might see that and reward you for that. So it's highly recommended that you go through and invest a little bit of time to create your character's backstory, link these details of your character's history into that backstory, and interweave it into a consistent story, if you will, so that the Dungeon Master can use that as a basis of maybe introducing their own sort of adjustments or minor adjustments to that, and create a really fleshed out backstory campaign base for you. Now, the Rogue is one of those few classes that can really drive details about the history of the less savory areas of whatever world your character happens to be campaigning in, and as a result, adds a good twist to an active adventure that might take the party into those darker, less lit areas of the world. And when you add in information around their guilty pleasure, their adversary, or their benefactors, all of that can be used as the basis to be able to craft and create those less savory areas that the Dungeon Master might take your campaign through, for example. And you'll see that I'm going to say that a lot when it comes to these customization tables, because Dungeon Masters love it when the players take the time and effort to craft more detail about their character, because the DM can sort of glean off of that and invent some form of story around that to be able to link those aspects into the campaign that they have on the go, or may even craft an entire campaign around that. And then you're the main protagonist, if you will, when it comes to that particular storyline, and the rest of the party is your supporting cast. But that does bring us to the end of this particular video, and I want to thank you for watching. I do hope you found it useful and informative, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. I wish to thank you for taking the time to watch this particular video. I hope you found it informative and useful to familiarizing yourself with Fantasy Grounds in general, and that you had fun in the process. If you found the video useful and you liked the content of the particular video, go ahead and click that like button to let me know. And if you have any questions specific to the topic covered by this particular video, or just have some comments in general, please feel free to post something in the comments section, and I will do my best to respond to any questions that are asked. Additionally, I do release content quite regularly, and it's generally specific to Fantasy Grounds or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons at this time. So if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out, go ahead and subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure that notification is sent to you when I release a new video.